The morning Margaret Whitmore decided to teach me about property compliance was the morning she accidentally created a $2.3 million water park on my ranch with herself as the star attraction. Picture this, 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. I was sipping coffee on my front porch, watching the sunrise paint the Texas Hill country gold, when I heard what sounded like a freight train having an epic meltdown with Niagara Falls. I stepped outside, and there was our beloved HOA president standing beside her gleaming excavator like she was conducting some demented, groundbreaking ceremony. Except instead of cutting a ribbon, she was watching a 30-foot geyser of county water baptize my front yard in a roaring explosion of mud and pressure. Margaret's designer blazer, the one she wore specifically to intimidate homeowners, was now modern art, splattered head to toe in thick Texas mud. Her perfectly applied mascara was staging a dramatic exit down both cheeks. The smell of diesel fuel, wet earth, and pure panic hung thick in the air, almost as thick as her wounded pride. See, Margaret thought she was digging a spite well to secure HOA water access on what she claimed was disputed land. Instead, she had severed the main line feeding 17,000 residents. That single power trip not only flooded my property, but exposed the corruption that would end her reign forever. My name is Jake Thompson. 6 months earlier, I had thought my biggest problem would be deciding whether to paint my barn red or leave it weathered gray for the Instagram tourists who kept stopping by to photograph what they called authentic Texas. I had spent 20 years debugging other people's code disasters and finally cashed out, moving back to my grandfather's 47 acres of heaven. The plan was gloriously simple. Work remotely from the front porch, maybe convince a few photogenic cows to pay rent by simply existing beautifully, and rediscover what silence sounded like without endless Zoom meetings. The morning air here tasted like cedar and possibility. Meadowlarks provided the soundtrack instead of sirens, and the gravel crunched under my boots like nature's own stress relief. I had found paradise in a 1,950 square foot farmhouse that creaked in all the right places and a barn that had outlasted 3 generations of Thompsons. For exactly 93 days, life was perfect. Then Margaret Whitmore moved in next door and decided my paradise needed management. Willow Creek Estates had sprouted along my eastern fence line like expensive mushrooms after a rainstorm. McMansions so large they seemed to have their own weather systems, complete with an HOA that regulated everything from mailbox fonts to acceptable shades of beige. Margaret did not just move into the biggest house. She declared herself its empress and immediately began expanding her empire. Our first encounter felt like a software crash in real time. She materialized at my door in a power suit pressed so crisp it could cut glass. Her blonde hair pulled back tight enough to serve as a medieval torture device. She carried a leather portfolio thick enough to stop bullets and introduced herself as President Whitmore. Not Margaret, President, as if she had been democratically elected to rule my Tuesday morning coffee ritual. "Your fence is 6 inches too close to our boundary," she announced, consulting her papers with the gravity of nuclear launch codes. "And that vehicle violates our commercial restrictions." She gestured to my F-150 like it was leaking radiation. I explained with the infinite patience I had developed from teaching recursion to marketing executives that my fence had minded its own business since 1987 and my truck was parked squarely on my own property. The smell of her expensive perfume mixed with the morning dew created an oddly threatening combination, like roses at a funeral. Margaret's smile could have frozen hellfire. "Property boundaries aren't always clear-cut, Mr. Thompson. I'll be in touch." That promise launched 3 months of escalating administrative terrorism. First came complaints about my unauthorized structures, my grandfather's barn that predated her subdivision by 40 years. Then reports of my truck being abandoned while I was literally driving it to buy groceries. Finally, she convinced the Postal Service that my mailbox violated regulations that existed only in her imagination. Each assault meant hours on hold with county offices, driving to government buildings that smelled like desperation and industrial coffee, all to prove I was not violating anything except Margaret's pathological need to control every blade of grass within a 5-mile radius. The county clerk started greeting me with, "Jake Thompson for the Margaret Whitmore duty again," like I was a regular at the world's most bureaucratic bar. But Margaret's masterpiece came 2 weeks ago when she announced the HOA was investigating water rights inconsistencies. She had hired a surveyor with homeowners' money to find any excuse to claim my land belonged to her suburban kingdom. The woman had done her homework with terrifying thoroughness. She discovered a 1952 survey discrepancy from when my grandfather bought the place. Nothing that actually affected the boundaries, but enough gray area to file lawsuits until I either bankrupted myself or surrendered my peace. The water rights angle was diabolical genius wrapped in bureaucratic legitimacy. Prove HOA water access across my property, force an easement fight, and game over. Margaret Whitmore had declared war on my retirement dream. Too bad for her. This old code monkey had spent decades solving problems far more complex than one power-drunk HOA president with delusions of municipal grandeur. I had no idea that sometimes the best debugging strategy is simply letting the system crash itself spectacularly. The smell of diesel fuel and pure panic would soon teach her that lesson in the most expensive way possible. 2 days after Margaret's water rights announcement, I woke to the romantic sound of diesel engines serenading my bedroom window at 6:30 a.m. Nothing says good morning like heavy machinery. I stumbled onto the front porch in my bathrobe, coffee mug in hand, expecting county workers fixing a pothole. Instead, I found Margaret conducting what looked like a corporate hostile takeover of my front yard. She stood beside a massive surveying truck, clipboard clutched like a battle plan, directing 2 bewildered men with equipment toward my fence line. The woman was dressed for a board meeting, not tramping through Texas dirt at dawn, because apparently property theft required business attire. "Morning, Mr. Thompson," she chirped with the fake cheerfulness of a used car salesman. "Just conducting our HOA boundary verification. Nothing to concern yourself with." The smell of diesel exhaust mixed with her overpowering perfume created an olfactory assault that made my head spin. Or maybe that was just the sheer audacity. "That's my property you're surveying, Margaret. President Whitmore, please." She consulted her clipboard with theatrical precision. "And actually, the survey will determine exactly whose property this is. According to our research, there may be some discrepancies in your grandfather's original deed. One surveyor was already setting up equipment 20 feet inside my fence line, treating my land like public park space. The other was photographing everything, my barn, my house, even my truck in the driveway. The metallic click-click-click of his camera sounded like a countdown timer to my financial doom. "You can't just walk onto my property without permission," I said, gripping my coffee mug hard enough to leave fingerprints. Margaret's smile could have cut diamond. "Mr. Thompson, if this area falls within HOA common space, which our preliminary research suggests it might, then we absolutely can. I'd hate for you to interfere with a legitimate property survey." Here is where 2 decades of debugging impossible problems kicked in. When your system crashes, you do not panic. You document everything and find a root cause. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Just documenting this legitimate survey for my records, President Whitmore. Margaret's practiced smile flickered. "That's unnecessary." "Oh, but thoroughness is so important in property matters," I replied, channeling her own condescending tone back at her. "I'm sure the county would love to see how professional HOA surveys operate these days." What Margaret did not know was that I had spent the previous evening researching Texas property law. In Texas, property surveys on disputed land require written notice to all affected parties 72 hours in advance, and trespass laws still apply during preliminary research. Margaret's surprise survey was about as legal as a $3 bill printed on toilet paper. "Gentlemen," I called to the surveyors loud enough for my phone to catch every word, "I'm going to need to see your permits and the written notice that should have been delivered to me 3 days ago." The lead surveyor's face went blank. "What written notice?" The lady said this was all approved. Margaret's complexion cycled through several interesting colors before settling on a shade that perfectly matched my barn's faded red paint. Now, Mr. Thompson, you're being deliberately obstructionist. I'm being deliberately legal, I replied, still recording as the surveyors began packing their equipment with the efficiency of professionals who had been burned by amateur hour before. Something you might want to try sometime. The sound of metal cases snapping shut was better than Christmas morning. This isn't over, Margaret hissed, her voice tight as piano wire about to snap. No, I agreed, watching her storm back toward her McMansion, designer heels clicking against asphalt like an angry woodpecker. I don't think it is, but as I watch her retreat, shoulders rigid with wounded pride and clipboard clutched like a security blanket, I realized Margaret had just handed me a gift wrapped in incompetence. She had shown me she was willing to break the law to get what she wanted. More importantly, she had assumed I was just another pushover retiree who would fold at the first sign of official-looking paperwork. Margaret Whitmore was about to learn that assumption was her first mistake. And in my experience debugging complex systems, when someone makes their first critical error, they're usually already coding their second. Margaret's revenge arrived exactly 1 week later, hand-delivered by a county inspector who looked like he would rather be investigating actual crimes. Mr. Thompson, he said, consulting his clipboard with all the enthusiasm of someone reading his own death warrant, I'm here about the violation. I was under my truck's hood, elbow-deep in spark plug therapy, when this bureaucratic meteor struck my peaceful Tuesday. The smell of motor oil and fresh coffee was about to be replaced by the stench of Margaret's latest masterpiece. Violations? I asked. Well, sir, Dave, his name tag looked as tired as his expression, squinted at his paperwork. Unauthorized livestock operations, improper waste disposal, and running a commercial vehicle repair business without permits. He gestured at my truck like it might explode. Multiple complaints with photographic evidence. I straightened up, wiping greasy hands on my shop rag. Margaret had weaponized bureaucracy with the precision of a Swiss clockmaker, turning my weekend truck maintenance into an environmental crime scene. Dave, this is my personal truck. I'm changing spark plugs, not running a chop shop. And what livestock? Do you see any cows? Dave surveyed my completely cattle-free property and made a note that looked suspiciously like complainant, possibly delusional. Protocol says I have to complete the inspection, sir. But between you and me, Texas county inspectors are legally required to investigate all formal complaints within 48 hours. But they can also file frivolous complaint reports that flag serial harassers and protect their future targets. Piss off enough inspectors with bogus complaints, and the system starts protecting your victims instead of enabling the crazy. Tell you what, Dave, let's do this inspection properly, document everything, and create a paper trail for when this inevitably escalates. We spent 20 minutes touring my property with the thoroughness of a crime scene investigation. Dave documented my obviously personal truck, my complete lack of livestock, and my environmentally pristine land. Each note was another nail in Margaret's credibility coffin. One more thing, I said as we finished, pulling out my phone. You might want to see when these photos were taken. I showed him security camera footage, time-stamped video of Margaret trespassing the day before, photographing my truck like she was documenting evidence for the International Criminal Court. Dave's eyebrows practically launched into orbit. She was on your property without permission, unless she's got a telephoto lens that can see through my barn. Dave closed his clipboard with finality. Mr. Thompson, I'm filing this as no violations found with a harassment notation. You might want to consider a counter-complaint. After Dave left, I sat on my porch steps, listening to meadowlarks and processing Margaret's latest strategic blunder. She had escalated from illegal surveys to filing false reports, burning through her credibility faster than a meth lab explosion. My phone buzzed with a text. Your little games won't work forever. Some problems require permanent solutions. A concerned neighbor. I screenshot the message and added it to my growing file labeled Margaret's Greatest Hits. The woman was documenting her own harassment campaign with the dedication of someone building her own prosecution case. Margaret's third assault came disguised as community concern, delivered through the Willow Creek Estates newsletter that somehow found its way into every mailbox within a 3-mile radius. The headline read, "Environmental harm threatens our children's safety." The article claimed my property posed significant risks to groundwater safety and that my refusal to cooperate with community safety inspections demonstrated a concerning disregard for neighborhood children's welfare. It included professionally staged photographs taken with a telephoto lens that made my normal barn look like a meth lab from a Netflix crime drama. Margaret's masterstroke was the call to action, a community safety meeting scheduled for that Thursday at 7 p.m. in the Willow Creek Clubhouse, where concerned residents could voice their legitimate safety concerns about my non-compliant property. She was organizing a lynch mob with Robert's Rules of Order. I was still processing this literary assassination when my phone rang. It was the County Environmental Health Department. "Mr. Thompson, we've received some very serious allegations about groundwater contamination on your property. We're afraid we'll need to schedule an emergency inspection." Margaret had gone nuclear. She had escalated to potentially criminal accusations that could cost me my property, my savings, and possibly my freedom if she had manufactured evidence. "Ma'am, I'm connected to the municipal sewer system. I don't have a septic system." The complaint included GPS coordinates and soil analysis showing elevated nitrate levels. In Texas, false environmental complaints can trigger automatic property liens and mandatory remediation costs that attach to your deed before any investigation proves wrongdoing. I told the investigator I had documentation of an ongoing harassment campaign and requested verification of the samples. She agreed to review my evidence. That night, I did what any self-respecting programmer does when facing a critical system failure. I dug into the data. While the glow from my monitor painted the room blue, I mapped every property transaction, HOA filing, and public record about Willow Creek Estates. What I found made my blood pressure spike. Margaret Whitmore was not just a power-hungry HOA president. She was running a sophisticated real estate scam. Her husband owned the surveying company she had hired. Her law school roommate handled the legal work. Her brother-in-law's development company flipped the land they recovered through manufacturer disputes. They had netted approximately $2.8 million in illegal land transfers over 18 months. My 47 acres would have added another $800,000 to their criminal retirement fund. The absolute best part, in her environmental complaint, Margaret had provided GPS coordinates and timestamps for her fraudulent soil samples. 2 of those coordinates placed her on my property at times when my security cameras were recording in high definition. One timestamp matched exactly with footage of Margaret trespassing with a small shovel and sample bags, like some demented suburban archaeologist. She had created a digital confession to evidence tampering, complete with metadata. I opened a new folder on my desktop labeled Project Margaret, Nuclear Option, and began organizing 2 years' worth of evidence into a package that would destroy her operation and hand the FBI a case so airtight prosecutors would fight over who got to put her away. The next morning, I began building my coalition. I called the environmental health investigator and emailed her the security footage of Margaret planting evidence. Her sharp intake of breath told me everything. I contacted the FBI's Financial Crimes Division with documentation of the multi-million-dollar fraud. I reached out to an investigative reporter at the Austin American-Statesman, and I enlisted a forensic accountant colleague to examine the HOA books. By Wednesday afternoon, my dining room looked like a crime thriller set. Evidence boards covered the walls connected by red string, financial records, photographs, legal documents, and security footage forming a web of proof. Wednesday morning brought Margaret's final desperate gambit, a perfectly typed legal threat taped to my front door from her law school roommate's firm. It gave me 24 hours to cease harassment, remove my surveillance equipment, and agree to mediation or face restraining orders, property liens, and damages exceeding $500,000. The final paragraph threatened immediate evacuation and remediation at my expense based on the fraudulent contamination claims. Then the county sheriff called about a complaint of threatening behavior and possible weapons violations. Margaret had escalated to filing false police reports. When Deputy Martinez arrived for the welfare check, I showed him the footage and explained the broader pattern, including the active FBI investigation. He left noting potential false reporting and suggested I file a countercomplaint. Thursday morning arrived with crisp autumn air. Margaret's meeting was at 7 p.m., but by 10 a.m., my phone was buzzing. Her brother-in-law called offering to buy my land at a generous price to avoid lengthy legal battles. I recorded the thinly veiled extortion attempt and forwarded it to the FBI agent. Other neighbors called to report Margaret going door-to-door with forged documents, claiming community votes could trigger automatic property seizures. Each call added another layer of criminal conspiracy. At 5 p.m., Margaret appeared at my door flanked by two men in cheap suits. "Mr. Thompson, I'm offering one final opportunity to resolve this privately. Unless you're confessing to federal crimes, we're done talking until tonight," I replied, recording the encounter. She left with a parting threat. "After tonight, you'll discover some problems have permanent solutions." The Willow Creek Clubhouse at 6:45 p.m. looked like a courtroom drama. FBI agents posed as concerned homeowners. The environmental investigator and reporter were in place. Margaret had transformed the room into her personal theater of justice, complete with a podium, charts, and a PowerPoint titled "Protecting Our Community: The Thompson Property Crisis." At exactly 7 p.m., she called the meeting to order. "Tonight, we address a clear and present danger to our neighborhood." She launched into her presentation with prosecutorial enthusiasm, displaying aerial photographs, fraudulent soil analysis, and testimonials. She called her brother-in-law as an expert witness, who announced his company was prepared to purchase my land immediately for emergency cleanup. That was when I stood up. "Point of order, President Whitmore. Mr. Thompson, you have no standing in these proceedings." Actually, I have quite a bit of standing, especially regarding criminal fraud, evidence tampering, and conspiracy charges. I connected my laptop to the projection system. The first slide appeared, the Margaret Whitmore Fraud Network. I explained that what they were witnessing was not a community safety meeting, but a criminal conspiracy to steal private property. Shocked gasps filled the room as I displayed financial records, bank transfers, and property deeds. Then I played the video of Margaret trespassing with sample bags, timestamps matching her fraudulent reports. The room's collective gasp was electric. Agent Rodriguez stood, badge gleaming. "FBI. Margaret Whitmore, Kevin Morrison, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, evidence tampering, and violation of federal disclosure laws." The click of handcuffs was the sweetest music I had heard in months. Margaret's final words, captured on camera, "This isn't over. You have no idea what you've done." But I knew exactly what I had done. I had debugged a corrupt system, removed the malicious code, and restored proper function to a community that deserved better. 6 months later, I sit on my front porch watching the sunrise paint the Texas Hill country gold, sipping coffee that tastes like freedom mixed with vindication. Margaret Whitmore is currently residing in a federal facility where her daily schedule is managed by people who do not care about her property compliance opinions. She received 18 months for conspiracy, evidence tampering, and false reports, plus 3 years probation and $8 million in restitution to victims. Kevin Morrison got 2 years, and his development company dissolved. Patricia Vance lost her law license. The HOA board was completely restructured with new bylaws requiring financial transparency and independent oversight. Tom Harrison's investigative series won a state journalism award and led to new legislation strengthening homeowners association oversight across Texas. The 17 families who had lost land recovered their property plus compensation. A community fund established with recovered fraud money now provides college scholarships for local kids. We upgraded the community water infrastructure, the same lines Margaret nearly destroyed. Every Thursday, we hold real community meetings in the same clubhouse, planning block parties and charity drives instead of criminal conspiracies. The sound of neighbors laughing together has replaced the click of Margaret's heels. I learned something important. When someone tries to steal your peace, sometimes the best response is not just defending yourself, but building something better for everyone around you. Document everything. Research the law. Build alliances with good people. And remember that bullies count on you being too tired or scared to fight back. They never expect you to fight smarter. If you have your own HOA horror story, I would love to hear it. Some of them make Margaret look like an amateur. And if this story gave you courage to stand up to corruption, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the best way to stop the Margaret Whitmores of this world is making sure everyone knows how to recognize them, document their actions, and serve them the justice they have been cooking up for themselves. The taste of justice, it turns out, is even sweeter when shared.